Hi, I'm Arlen Roth, and welcome to my video on learning rock and heavy metal guitar for Hot Licks instruction tapes. On this tape, we're going to be talking about a lot of the techniques that make up beginning rock and heavy metal guitar. We will talk about some of the more advanced techniques and styles, but I want to get you going on some of the rudiments of it, some of the proper ways to bend strings and create vibrato, and some of the beginning scales and some of the beginning licks that will get you on the way to developing your own style. So before we continue any further, you can't start any style unless you're in tune with me. So let's check our tuning together. Here's my high E string. Now the second string, which is B. The third string, G. D. The fifth string is A. And we have the low E. Check that with the high E string. Play an entire chord just to check our tuning, like an E chord. It sounds pretty good. Hope it sounds good to you out there on your guitar. Okay, now we can begin. Now, before we get on with any of the left-hand styles that I want to get into, we should talk about the right hand and picking and proper pick angle. Because a lot of people come to me who are holding the pick wrong after many years, and it just isn't, you just can't develop a proper style unless you're holding it right. So I like to use a medium pick, and of a normal size. You may find that you may want to use one of the more heavier thicknesses, or a triangle shape, something like that. Experiment, find what feels right for you. But I like this because it applies to all general styles. And I like to hold it so just maybe 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch is showing, and I'm not, therefore I don't have to grip it too hard, because if I held it like this where it was flopping around, I'd have to grip it too tightly. I wouldn't be able to have a relaxed wrist to play, because you really need that relaxed wrist action if you want to go across the strings. Some players who play very quickly actually abandon any anchoring and just try to get a whipping motion where their wrist is actually moving like that. Just don't be too conscious of that for now. Don't use your forearm too much back and forth like this, because that is a very stiff situation. So the pick is in there loosely, and that way I don't have to grip it too tight. It's just a little bit exposed. And then I just attack the strings. I try to attack them at the same angle each time. So in other words, if I'm playing this on the A string, I won't be like this by the time I reach the high E string. I'll try to come down a little bit with my arm and attack it in the same manner. See the way my hand is moving down. And just trying to get a nice even flow. In fact, if you're going to be playing any scales, if you know any scales right now, before we've gone on to learning some of our own, on this tape, you may want to just practice the alternate picking stroke. So make sure you have a nice relaxed wrist and we can really get going. Now I want to talk a little bit about some rhythm guitar, because rhythm guitar is very important in heavy metal and rock guitar as well. And there's something you've heard of, I'm sure, called power chords. They sound like that. The reason they're called power chords is obviously they sound very powerful, and they consist usually of a root and a fifth of the chord. Sometimes a root, fifth, and as well, but it's usually the two bottommost notes of a chord. In this case, we're playing an open A. It's open A string and the second fret on the D string, which is our fifth of the chord, an E note. My index finger here lays across the other strings and damps them out, just in case I wanted to play it very strongly and have them damped out. The thumb also comes over and stops the low E. So with that damping process now, I can just strike those two notes, even if I give the guitar a very strong flourish with the right hand. That's A. Now the open D power chord position is basically the same thing, but moved over to the next string. Second fret on the D, I'm sorry, second fret on the G string, and the open D note. Very simple. So they have A, D. Now if you want to play E in the open position, it's just all the way down, low E, and the fifth of the chord, which is a B note, lies on the second fret of the A string now. So we have those three to work with, and even if that's all you know on the guitar, you start making up progressions. I've heard a lot of songs like this. Was written out for you in the tablature, and you could see that there are some rests there. I'm, again, trying to keep my right hand loose. I'm not simply being very stiff and playing like that, but I'm actually keeping the rhythm going. So when I'm damping the strings, you can hear that pattern. It's like a drummer. It's like bass and hi-hat and snare. Experiment a little bit more with the bar. You can actually, instead of just playing those two notes, you can make it into three by taking your index finger, making more of a bar out of it. So you're getting open A now, the second fret, which is E, on the next string, and then the second fret on the G, which is your next octave of A. So now you have a three-note power chord. For D, it would look like this. Open D, A, and then the third fret on the B string. A full D D chord is like this. We all know that. We're just not playing that major third on top. And then for E, we have this bar. And I must emphasize that the bar is only pressing down as much as I need. It's only these two strings. The rest are being damped out. So it's not a full bar. It's not as painful as a full bar. It's just the tip of my finger catching those two notes. So let's try it again. A, D, E. It's 1, 4, 5. 1, 4, 5. Okay, those are some power chord positions, and if you want to move them up now into the bar forms where, say, we know about the E chord, we know that we can move up and have a bar of F, F sharp, G, G sharp. Well, here's our A now, and these three notes, you can play either 2 or 3 notes at the bottom of the chord, are the exact same notes that were down here. It's a little bit of a fatter sound. You know, you sometimes should choose where you play on the neck based on the kind of sound you want to get. Different strings resonate differently, and it's just a different sound. A lot of times if you hear Chuck Berry play, he'll be in a position like that rather than a more twangy, open position. It's a little bit fatter sounding up here, so you can now play your power chord here. That's for A. Only a partial bar. The index finger is damping out, and it's playing that low E string. That's all we need, because these two fingers are now playing these two strings. D is moved over 1 string, because that's now based upon this chord, that position of D. And for E, we can simply move it up 2 frets or a whole step. What's nice about this position is we can split our octave. We can now have the low E string ringing. So make sure your index finger is just clearing enough so you have enough room to get that E string in there. That's a really nice power chord. With that octave, you're getting 1, 2, actually 3 octaves in there with that position. So that gives you a very full power chord sound. We're still not playing a major third. That's one of the keys to the power chord sound, is that we're just playing it in a modal way. We're not using any third to define the chord. Now, heavy metal guitar and rock guitar in general, there's a lot of root music that is very important to this, as it is with any form of music. And when we're talking about rock and we're talking about heavy metal, we really want to refer to the blues. The blues is where this all came from, particularly the electric style of blues that was started in the 50s and had evolved from the earlier country sounds, country blues sounds. So when you talk about a player like Chuck Berry, there could be no power chords today if it wasn't for Chuck Berry first playing some shuffles in 1956. Know those shuffle positions really accurately. There are open positions for A. Again, start with that power chord. Now you walk 2 frets up with your 3rd finger. It's like this. Very straight ahead, 2 strings. Now D. And just over to the next string. Now back to A. The renowned 1-4-5 blues, 12-bar blues. You can also throw in a 7th above it. 5th fret. stretch for that position. Now I can try it in the closed position. It gets easier as you move up the fingerboard because the frets become closer together. The only difference here is now we have to hold 2 notes down while we play the shuffle, and it gets kind of hard because when we want to play our 7th of the chord, we have a 6 fret stretch there. So it's like this for A. It's way up there. Look at how my hand is stretching. It'll get easier the more you do it. Now switch. There's your D. Go all the way up to E. One more time. Walk it up. Try it up here for D. Should be a lot easier there. And down to A. Stay on those same 2 strings for E. 12th fret, 10th, back to 5th. Well, you should try that in many different patterns. There are a lot of ways of playing shuffles, you know. It's a very slow, heavy kind of... probably associated more with the kind of blues that a heavy metal band would play. You know, sort of a melding of styles there. So, you know, experiment, play the kind of music you'd like to, make the kind of music you'd like to make with that. And of course, when you listen to some of your favorite records, I know you'll be able to pick out these guitar parts and try and play along with them and understand what a certain guitarist was doing at a certain time. So now we can start talking more about some other chord forms. One power chord form that does include a major third, which I really like to use a lot, and other players such as Pete Townsend have also used it to a great degree. And in this case, we're playing our A bar here. It's on the 2nd fret, covering the D, G, and B strings, right across with our open A. And now we hammer on. We put a partial D chord on top of it. The way it would be written in the music is a D over A, meaning a D chord over an A bass. And you can practice hammering. Hammering means that you actually create a new note without picking it again. So we pick once, and there comes the second chord. So if you start doing some right-hand flourishes, you sound very Townsend-esque. Pattern. Here is D, A, now slide it up to the 9th fret, and there's an E, A, D, A, E, A, all with the A bass. That kind of separation between bass notes and treble notes is very important in heavy metal and rock playing, where you can keep a pattern going using that open string. So I'm sure you've recognized that from some other songs, and you've heard that kind of style before. Now we're going to start talking about some scales. We're going to get into playing a little bit of lead guitar, which I'm sure you're anxious to do as well. as I am too, because my fingers are killing me from these bars. Anyway, we're going to start with our open E scale. It's a basic scale, but it's very important in rock and metal playing and blues as well. And it sounds like this. Third fret and second fret, third finger and second finger. Easy to remember. I want you to use that picking that I talked about earlier, where we go back and forth to get that smooth as possible. Okay, now you can walk that up into a closed position. If you wanted to now play it in F, it would simply be like this. F sharp. G. I should point out, though, here that when I talk about the G position, I generally like to change this note, that position of that A sharp on the low E string, to now being played by the first finger on the first fret of the A string. So we must start the scale now with our third finger on the G note. So it's like this. So that's as we start moving it up. Getting back down to this open position, a lot of the improvisational things we would do with this scale are based upon what I call passing tones. We would use them, they usually occur in the fast flurry of notes, particularly in this kind of playing, where you hear things like... to use those blue notes, notes that are really dissonant to the chords, but they do work as far as moving down and making the scale more melodic. So in this case, we're talking about the flatted fifth, which is an A sharp note, or B flat. Okay, now as far as hammer-ons go and that kind of technique, getting new sounds out of the guitar, developing new life on the string, we'll start with working with that scale, okay? Now here's how we would go, just using hammer-ons. We're only picking each string one time. See that? The hammer-ons are not coming from too far above. You don't want to be coming from outer space. You want to get a nice, clean, short hammer-on with a lot of strength. You can do the same thing with hammers and pulls. Notice that a pull-off is really a left-hand pluck. It's not the same thing as a lift-off. It's not that, but it's actually a downward plucking motion. You hear that little pluck that occurs. So now we can create 3 notes with only 1 picking stroke. To a closed position, it will be a little tougher because you don't have that open string to go to. For example, in G, you would have to have that first finger anchored, and you would have to know when to move. E string, now B string, now the G, D, A, slide, hammer, pull, slide down. So that's 4 notes with 1 picking stroke. And then finally our low E string. Now getting back to the open position, there's a scale that I like to use a lot to get people into this particular technique, and I call it the backtrack scale. It sounds like this. Backtrack because I always use 3 strings and then go back to the middle string of that previous lick. I use those next 3, then I go back again. That is my renowned backtrack scale. Still be using a combination of back and forth picking, even though we are using an awful lot of left-hand technique. Don't let the picking go out the window, because now we're concentrating so much on the left hand. And notice that my thumb is coming over. It's giving a little opposite pressure so I don't lose the guitar and lose the strings and just go flying off the edge of the fingerboard. Try that now with the passing tones I talked about, like the flatted 5th here on the 3rd fret of the G string. We can just make a nice pull-off lick based on that. We're using our 2nd and 1st finger this time because they're stronger. The second and 3rd would require too much other anchoring, and you don't know where to put your 1st finger and thumb, and it gets kind of messy. So I just like to use 2nd, pulling down. You don't want to pull too hard to make that note sharp. You've got to anchor each one. Each note has to have independence. So that's a really nice flashy lick. You can even just go all 3 like that. That's a lick that you hear a lot of people like Santana use, and also heavy metal guitarists. Same pattern, just repetitious, going from the high E to the B and the G. If you wanted to get experimental and move it up to a closed position, again, here's how it would look. It's a good experiment for getting your index finger over quickly. Don't try to fake it and use a bar, because it'll just tie up the rest of your hand. You're using too much energy to press down that bar. You're better off switching when the time is right. This, by the way, is with all downstrokes with the pick, because I only have to pick 1 time per string. Down, down, down. Downstroke. So here's how it looks fast. Picking down, but it's not this kind of down motion. It still is with a relaxed wrist. It's nice to resolve to our root after it, of course. Open E. Now, the flatted 5th also exists, of course, on the A string as well, on the 1st fret. You can make a nice pull-off lick there, but this time we have to use an open string right away and go to the low E. So it's like this. Open, 1, pull off, then the 3rd fret, and finally open E. You hear that a lot in heavy metal. This is first going to low E, and then the high E. So something very popular in rock guitar and blues guitar, where you think you're going to hear the lower octave and you actually play that higher one instead. Separation and that damping to really create a nice clean sound for the last note. Now you can combine them. And the flatted fifth passing tones, I love to play those sort of what I call roll licks, where you actually smoothly go up and down like that. Here's the whole pattern, starting on the open G string, open 2, 3. Now let there be a little bit of dissonance as you go from playing that chromatic run. You go from second, third, and then the open. So let it overhang a little bit. A lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs in there. In the end, you can actually slide down. 2, 1, open, pull-off. Pretty fast with that, because it's just a nice roll. It's the right hand doing a lot of the work. There I'm sliding up to my root note, which is an E now on a new position, 5th fret of the B string. Okay, when we're talking about pure pull-off licks and downward strokes, we want to get this kind of lick going. I love this for some very flashy heavy metal stuff, where you're actually doing all downward plucking. And just getting a very rapid-fire motion between the high E string and the B string. Now, if you notice the right hand, I'm just digging in. Like that. Now what's happening is the thumb is actually coming across, and with each stroke I'm naturally damping out, just as a result of the fact that I happen to be playing in this position. I'm damping out those lower strings, because if I wasn't, you'd hear a lot of ringing, and just the fact that I'm hitting the neck so much with my left hand would make all these strings start to ring. Try it slowly first. I know I'm going kind of fast for you right now. So they're in, it's a 16th note. There's actually 16 notes for the bar. Don't pull off too far. Don't make it sharp. So you see that that lick relates to this one. Also go from the 3rd fret to the 2nd. Now I would definitely recommend, if you're going to go higher up, try to use a little bit of a bar. Because this is happening so quickly, why have your index finger be jumping around like crazy? You could get it caught there. So we're going to go, this is for the key of G. We're going 6, 3, 6, 3, but we'll keep our bar down. important to notice that an index finger bar of the top two strings is really not a bar like this in the classical sense, but it's a little curl around the edge of the fingerboard. So you get a nice even curl, and you don't have to press so hard. It's not, all the energy is not coming from the top. It's coming from the fact that your thumb is also behind the fingerboard, pressing an opposite pressure against that, what the index finger is doing. So there's a little curl around. And you get that kind of pull-off action. Or a half step below. Now I'm playing with one hand. I'm not using my right hand at all. To prove it, here I'm doing this. Do all those as a good practice. You can do a 3-note pull-off. That's all with one hand. Obviously, the damping will not be as clean, but just to get your left hand really strong. Developing good independence and getting the volume just as even. It's very important when you pull off or hammer on that the volume be similar to the actually plucked note. Keep the volume and the tempo even. Okay, that should be a good workout for your left hand and left arm. I can start to feel it across the whole top of my arm when I start doing that, with the tendons getting very tight. So it's a good thing to limber up with. Okay, now there is a longer scale that we can work with. And what we do is we actually connect. I started hinting at it when I was talking about that high E note there on the 5th fret of the B string, and we move up like this. There's a slide, a couple of slides that connect us into higher positions. So it goes like this. A lot of licks that come out of that. Using hammer-ons, you can combine with the slides now. Of course, going down, you use pull-offs in the same manner. This little position where I ended up sliding 2 to 4, and catching that note in the middle is a place where a lot of licks come from. Demonstrating, it's time to really talk about some string bending. Okay, now here, in the case of bending the strings, we're talking about the fact that we should always use as many fingers as possible behind the note that's being bent. This is really important, really crucial. If you're going to be bending with your first finger alone, obviously you can't do that, and there are some bends, but it's hard to go 2 frets with it, or usually just 1 fret in distance. In this case, we have a lick for A. Now, there's a pivoting motion that's going on. This part of my finger right here is just pivoting off the side of the guitar, and I'm pulling that note. And you also see that vibrato, which is also a very important aspect of lead guitar playing, comes from the same pivoting motion, only now I'm using my thumb to come across and give some more pressure, and have a little bit more security. Again, I'm using 3 fingers to shake it right in the middle of the neck. Independence there, and then down. If we were going to play vibrato with the first finger, it'll be freer like that, where our hand is completely free except for that one pivoting point. And the index finger, or I should say the first finger, which is also known as the index finger, just gets that nice even vibrato as a result of the pivot. It's not, don't think towards the end of your finger, but just pivot. Now if you want to bend with your third finger, which is also very important, here we have a bend on the 8th fret going up to the 10th on the B string. And to get it clean, we're bending up with 2 fingers, but our index finger is also laying across the other strings, pushing them out of the way, and so when we return, it's quiet. There's none of this. No twanging when you come back. Thumb is damping the low E string out. I could hit the whole guitar from 10 miles away and still only get that one note. Maybe 5 miles. Now I'm bending up 2 frets there. You generally don't bend any further than that. I would recommend using some, don't go with very light strings. I would recommend using 10s. In this case, I'm using 10s. You can start with 9s, but I would not recommend starting as light as 8s because you're going to be overbending and you're not going to be developing any strength in your fingers at all. The fatter the string, the heavier the gauge, the more sustain you're going to be getting out of your guitar. So now you see here we have a new problem, which is vibrato while bending. The vibrato, now we don't have the easy option of using pivoting for vibrato where something else is helping us. We have to bend and release, push, release, push. Very gradually, we want to get that kind of even pulse to it. All right, as far as what notes to bend within the scale are concerned, that really is a very important topic of discussion because many guitarists, when they first learn how to bend, and it's a really nice technique to know, and it feels good, but you tend to just bend all over the place, and it's a nice way to discover some things, but there are some rules to follow. If we're talking about the open position, obviously we can't really start bending until we get up here, the low E string, and the 3rd fret, we can bend that. 2 frets. We're going from A to G, or we have a major 3rd in the middle. Our G sharp. The 4th, or the A note, that can also be bent up from the 4th to the 5th. That's probably the most common bend of all. And the other note of the blues scale that we would bend a lot is the D, in this case the 7th, up to the root. The high G also can be bent. Just remember that some of them are resolutions and some aren't. In this case, we're not resolving. We have to come back down to resolve to our chord. In this case, we are resolving to our root. This is also a resolution up to our 5th. But we can use it to phrase some other licks. In the higher position, as we go up, you can also bend on the 5th fret there. Of course, if we close the scale up, say if we go to a G chord, now playing the scale for G, we have a lot more options because they're all closed and they can all be bent practically. That one. seventh, we can bend up the middle seventh to our middle root. It's a tough bend. 3 frets, I mean 3 fingers, and you get a little vibrato, and you, of course, have to pull away from you, not towards you, but away. Now we're up in A, and we have make a half step bend. When you're thinking about rock and heavy metal guitar, most people seem to talk about the higher notes, and not enough emphasis is put on the growliness and the emotional quality of the low notes. So I like to bend those, and also, believe it or not, they're a little easier. They may be heavier, but they're also softer. Now we'll go to the topic of right-hand hammer-ons. This is a very important thing with heavy metal guitar. And with the advent of players such as Eddie Van Halen and guys like him, we're seeing a lot of these styles. In fact, it's getting a little bit overplayed these days. It's getting to be kind of a passé thing, but who knows? Maybe 50 years from now, when somebody looks at this tape, it might become fresh and new again. It's still an exciting technique. In this case, I'm combining a bend, which is, of course, changing the pitch of the string now. 2 frets, it's going up. So when you want to catch the note, for example, we want to get a high A, don't press the high A. You have to press the note. There will be a G. And now it sounds like an A. So it's a bend and hammer, and you have to look at your string because, of course, it's moved over. It's now over a little bit. The vibrato should then come from this hand, from the left hand. This, of course, doesn't require a pick, so what I do is I take the pick and I sort of palm it between those 2 fingers and just do that. Your long nails can sometimes get in the way. I have long nails there, and it's a little hard, because not only am I hitting it with the fleshy part, but also my nail is hitting the fingerboard a little bit. Experiment with different melodies there. Now, when you're talking about this kind of technique, I also like to do positions where you are not actually bending, but just doing pull-offs that could not normally be done with just one hand. I mean, that's the idea, is we want to get into some new positions here. So we can go 10, 8, 5. Or 12. You can do any notes you want, really, but in this case we are getting a nice minor chord triad. Now it's a pull-off. I hammer, pull, pull. So I'm pulling towards me once and away from me a second time. Here's our major chord, minor, major. Go across different strings. And you can use 3 fingers here. So that's a really important heavy metal technique, and something to get into and keep practicing it. Is something I don't want to show you too much with that now, because I want you to really work on the more traditional combinations of right hand and left hand. But still, it's a good style. And now we can finish off with a little bit of vibrato bar work, or a tremolo bar, or as they may call it, a whammy bar now, or a wang bar. There's a million different terminologies for it. Of course, Jimi Hendrix was the first great post-surf music user of this that really made it sing. I like to use it often with harmonics. If I'm playing a run, try to create a note that sustains a great deal. Feedback-like effects, or if you start to get some feedback, it's good to make it bend. There's not much use while you're actually bending a note, because then you're just going to be undoing the job you're already doing, because if you bend up and then bend down, what's the point? I like to use it on open strings or getting a growling effect. Use it sparingly. Now, you notice I'm holding it all the time. This is a fairly short vibrato bar, but I'm holding it between the last two fingers, and while I'm picking, I'm moving across with it, and when I want to single out a note, I'll then give it the vibrato. Now, there are some of the styles you can do with the whammy bar. It's a fantastic technique, and in fact, I like using it sometimes just in little surf music, starting to sound like the Ventures or the Surfaris all over again, with a little bit of a more heavy metal sound on top of it. Of course, they're making a lot of good ones now that don't put the guitar so out of tune. I'm fortunate in this case that this old Strat, which is a 57, does have a bar that doesn't put it out of tune, but usually your strings can go out of tune. So those other types that they have on the more current guitars that have a string locking mechanism will help you out a lot. So I hope you've enjoyed this tape. I've tried to cover a lot of material for you. There's endless more material about guitar playing, but after all, this is only 1 hour, and it's only one time we got together. You can keep going over the tape, and you know, when you get more relaxed with your playing, just go from one lick to the next, one scale to the next. You don't have to absorb it all in one day or one evening. So please feel free to write to me. Let me know what you think of the tape and what other types of tapes you would like to see in the future. So until then, this is Arlen Roth saying, keep on picking, keep on howling and screaming, and I'll see you out there. So take care and bye-bye.